Are you like most sales and other professionals who want to grow their wealth faster than what they are currently doing through their company 401k, even with that company match, the stock market, or just plain saving money? Would you sleep better at night if you had the financial freedom to be job optional in just 3 to 5 years through investing in real assets? Maybe you don't want to stop working, but wouldn't it be cool if you could retire a decade earlier than most and do the traveling you and your family have planned for years while you're still young and can enjoy it? Let's face it, most busy professionals don't have the time or desire to take on more work outside of their W-2 to grow their wealth. On The Wealth Flow, each week we share the stories, the investments, and take a deep dive into the various asset classes that can deliver that accelerated growth to your portfolio passively. That's right, no extra work for you. Instead, we'll put your money to work. Learn what the 95% aren't talking about and join the top 5% of earners today on The Wealth Flow.
All right, welcome to The Wealth Flow. I'm excited about my guest today, Nick Prefontaine. He is a 3-time best-selling author and was named top motivational speaker in 2022 by Yahoo Finance. He's a speaker, a founder, and a CEO of Common Goal. He has a system that we're going to talk a little bit about today called the S.T.E.P system. And he's able to lead clients through their trauma. Only once they've made it through, that's where their limited potential lies. Nick has been featured on Brains Media, Sway, and Authority Magazine. Nick, welcome to the show.
Keith, I'm so excited to be joining you and excited to be here.
Yeah, and what I normally start with every guest is really your backstory, and I know we're going to talk a lot about your backstory here, but where you grew up and what eventually got you to not only being a top motivational speaker. I know you're in the real estate industry as well. So yeah, if you could tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure thing. Yeah, it dates back, and they kind of intertwine. My start in real estate as well as my childhood and growing up. So happy to share it with you. I was at ski club in 8th grade with my friends, and on the way to the mountain, we had brought all our snowboard gear onto the bus so we could get ready, so we wouldn't miss a precious moment once we got to the mountain. So we got to the mountain, headed right for the chairlift. On the chairlift ride up, we noticed that it was very icy, Keith, because it had been raining. So people were wiping out everywhere. However, we weren't beginners. We weren't newbies. We knew what we were doing, and got to the top, buckled into my snowboard, and then I charged towards that biggest jump in the terrain park with all my speed. And actually, going up to the jump, I caught the edge of my snowboard on the snow going up to the jump, and that kind of threw me off balance. I was told that I landed on my head. I wasn't wearing a helmet, and that's kind of after the fact that I learned that. Another thing that I learned was that the only protection that my head had was some goggles. I wore some really thick padded goggles, so the initial impact, and then with each subsequent impact, as I kept hitting my head and rolling down the mountain, these goggles mysteriously moved to cushion each blow as I rolled down the mountain.
Oh, wow.
Another thing that I learned was that they wanted to, because of the severity of my injuries, they wanted to bring a helicopter to the mountain to rush me to the hospital. They couldn't because it was too windy, so they had to send in an ambulance. And out of all the paramedics in the area, there was only one who could intubate right on the spot, and I needed that to be able to breathe. He was one of the paramedics that showed up to the mountain that day. Lucky for me.
Yeah.
Then when I made it to the hospital, I was in the intensive care unit. Of course, unable to communicate anyone because I was in a coma. So I was in a coma for 3 weeks. I really don't remember a month, but it was 3 weeks that I was actually in the coma. When I got to the hospital, I was resting in that coma, unable to communicate with anyone. And the doctors, no fault of theirs, came into my room to share progress updates with my parents to tell them what was going on. And as you can imagine, at least initially, it was started out here and then more grim and more grim every time they came in to share news about how I was doing. The doctors started to share that, what they thought about me and everything. My parents stopped them. So those three things really broke for me in the right way. Meaning that if it was different, who knows if I would be here today. They made the doctors step outside the room to share the news because they didn't want that to infiltrate my mind. They understood the power of the mind, Keith, and they didn't want any of that to influence me. So once outside my room, the doctors shared with my parents that, look, he's in a coma. Even if he's able to come out of it, there's a good chance that he's probably not going to be able to walk, talk, or eat on his own again.
Wow.
They took the information, thanked the doctors, and then this allowed me to treat it like any other situation. So a month after my accident, when I was transported to a rehab hospital in Boston, and I was aware of my surroundings, I got up, did the best that I could, and I kept getting better every day. So the very first thing I could do, believe it or not, was only sit up in bed. That was my first step, was sitting up in bed for minutes at a time. And I was sweating. I was thoroughly exhausted, like I had just ran a marathon. So that even though it was tiny, that was my first step. And they were long days for me at the hospital. I can remember that, and I like to share this particular story with everyone because it's important. I remember early on in my recovery, I would get up and then I would need help learning how to shower again. Now, if you can picture that, I didn't, it was basically like I was a 14-year-old baby. I didn't know anything. I had to learn everything all over again. So I needed my physical therapist in the morning to teach me how to shower again, that the water came before the soap, as simple as that sounds. Then I had breakfast and then it was off to my first sessions of the day of physical, occupational, and speech therapy. After which we broke for lunch. And I can remember one of these days, it was early on in my recovery, I was still in a wheelchair, not a fully supported wheelchair, which I started out with when I could hardly move, but just a regular wheelchair. I remember sitting in my room and looking over my situation, and I just couldn't get it. I couldn't understand what was going on. And I turned to my mom, who was with me every day, and she was part of my support. I turned to her and I said, am I ever going to be able to walk again? She didn't even hesitate. She said, of course you are. That's what we're doing here, so you can get everything back and we can go home.
Good for her.
And this allowed me to continue to take my next step. And the reason I share this story is because people hear of my accident that I got in and that I ran out of the hospital, and they think, oh, great, easy for you kind of thing. And it's not that simple. I share this story because we all have doubts, and I'm human just like everyone else is. Now, unknowingly during my recovery, I operated under this system, the S.T.E.P system, and that's what we teach now, or that's what I teach with the people that I work with. S.T.E.P is an acronym for support. You got to make sure that you have your support lined up right from the start. This doesn't necessarily have to be family and friends, but it's going to have you falling back on relationships that you built prior to your setback. And T is trust. You have to trust that once you take your first step, your next step is always going to be available to you. Trust it. And this also goes back to trusting yourself. that you have a calling, you have that voice, you got to follow that voice inside of you for a reason. So early on in my recovery, around this same time that I had the doubt, I can remember I overheard my parents talking to the doctors and the therapist saying, all right, what do we have to do to make sure Nick makes a full recovery? And I heard in the back of my head, no, you're going to run out of the hospital. So then running out of the hospital, Keith, became our common goal and what everyone was working towards. And then E, back to STEP. E of the STEP system is energy. So maintaining your energy allows your body's natural ability to be able to heal itself. And we are all born with an innate knowing inside us that keeps us healthy. And if we don't have our energy, how can we make sure that we're available to lead others through whatever they're going through? Never mind ourselves. We have to make sure we have our energy. And finally, P is persistence. Once you've taken your first step, keep getting up every day and taking your next step, no matter how small. And also by continuing to take that next step every day, you are building and doing something every day. You are building an unstoppable momentum. So if you fast forward less than 60 days later, I ran out of the hospital, and that was my goal from as early as I could communicate. And after running out of the hospital, it really wasn't like my work was done. I had to continue to go to outpatient therapy for another 6 months of physical, occupational, and speech therapy, along with being tutored all summer long in order to continue on to high school with the rest of my classmates. And looking back on this, it's a little surreal that only 18 months later, after finishing my outpatient therapy, I got my start in real estate, which was door knocking on pre-foreclosure doors or homeowners that have received the notice of default letter from the bank. And not sure if you can relate to this. You might be able to. When you're younger, especially like when you're a teenager, your time frame, your time horizon, your time view is compressed. So like 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, that feels like a lifetime. Yeah. So for me, I didn't even realize it, that only 18 months later, I was door knocking pre-foreclosure doors. I didn't even realize that was a big deal. To me, a lifetime had gone by. Yeah, and I was like, sure. All right, I'm ready for the next thing. So, I would go. Well, actually, I can see you taking a breath. I'll take a breath and take a step down off my podium.
Yeah, no, I think, no, I think there's a lot there in your story. And I do want to ask a little bit about that. You know, it is strange how, you know, in that moment, you know, you talked about your goggles, being the only thing really protecting your head, and that it kind of positioned itself along the way, which made the impact, you know, while significant, it helped. It probably saved your life. What do you attribute that to? You know, just, and then the you know, doctor or the you know, ER guy that had the ability to help you breathe again, being on the mountain. You know, there's just a lot of you know, I would call them miracles, but there's a lot of things that that happen there, and I'm just curious as to what you attribute that to.
Well, I don't know what your beliefs are and what your listeners' beliefs are, but I feel that everything happens for a reason. So I feel that all those things that broke for me that way during that fateful day in February of 2003 was for a reason. And I feel that I found that today, and I'll get that. I'll get to that a little bit later in my story. I feel like I'm following my calling right now, and which is helping people to get through their trauma, and then once they make it through, that's where they're able to access their limitless potential. I really feel like I'm doing my calling right now. And for the past 2.5 years, So prior to 2.5 years ago, April, May, June of 2021, I've always had this voice in the back of my head, Keith, that has been telling me that I have to exactly that. I have to be helping others that are going through their trauma or life challenge get through to the other side. And that's where they can thrive with the rest of their lives. And I've always had that voice in the back of my head. And also coupled with that, I needed to be sharing my story, speaking, inspiring others from stage. And I've always had that voice in the back of my head. However, a little over 2.5 years ago, I got connected with my mentor, Trisha Brooke. And since I've had that initial call with her back in May of 2021, there has been no voice. What that's evidence of for me is that I'm doing exactly what I was put on this earth to do, which is help others through their trauma. And I've always unconsciously done it throughout my life. Like anyone's going through any kind of trauma, it's, oh, you got to talk to Nick. Have you talked to Nick yet? And I've always just unconsciously shared this step system with them.
Mm-hmm.
But now working with Trisha, she helped me get my company started, Common Goal, and really build my platform, my foundation for speaking and telling my story. And now I'm speaking to several organizations that deal with individuals going through trauma, like brain injury associations and things like that.
Yeah, it's an incredible story for sure, and I think you're right. I think you're doing what you were meant to do, and it's weird how things happen like that. Like you said, happen for a reason. Who would have predicted that something that was, I'm sure, one of the worst days of your life, and I can't imagine as a parent, your dad, your mom, getting that phone call. And then having to come in. And I want to maybe talk a little bit about what you said with your mom, which I thought was good. Both your mom and your dad, not having the doctor brief them in front of you, not making sure that they gave you the best possible outcome, that they shared with you, that you're going to run out of the hospital. How much of a difference do you think those kind of things made when you were in that state?
It's unquestionable. They had a huge impact. I mean, who can say for sure, right? Because we all can't go back in time. However, from what I've learned about the power of the mind now and the power of the subconscious mind, even though I was in a coma, my subconscious mind was still active. I was still taking information. So I think that was absolutely crucial that they made. And that's why I say it's three things. It's my goggles, the right person being on staff as a paramedic in the area. And the third thing is my parents having the foresight, because they understood the power of the mind, of saying, no, not in front of him. And I see this to this day with family members and other people that are going through trauma. And one of the things that I talk about within S.T.E.P, my ebook, free ebook, which I have at the end. I can tell you listeners how to get that. Is you got to make sure you have an advocate, because without an advocate, so my parents were advocating on my behalf. They were saying to the doctors, don't share the news here in front of him. They made him step outside. So one of the first things I talk about in S.T.E.P under the support category is you got to make sure you have your advocate. So that's one of the things I go into detail in S.T.E.P. And I think it's so important. This can be applied to anything too. It doesn't necessarily only have to be a trauma. Since we've developed this within the past couple of years, you can really apply it to anything, whether it's starting a business, overcoming an injury, an illness, anything. Doesn't have to be as severe as a trauma, but that's one of the things I talk about. And I think it's crucial to make sure you have an advocate, someone advocating on your behalf.
Yeah, for sure. It's got to make the difference. And I guess, let's maybe go through S.T.E.P, one of the letters at a time, again. And I just want to make sure that the listeners, kind of get that initial framework. And, so maybe if you could just take those one at a time and kind of share your the importance of each one of those steps.
Sure. And I really find myself talking about this more and more, is that this is what I've unconsciously used throughout my whole life to overcome anything. So, and this is how I approach anything. So if you fast forward a little bit, I know we didn't talk too much about, my real estate background, but if you fast forward a little bit, in 2012, I developed a, issue with my voice. I think this will help illustrate a little bit more.
Yeah.
So I developed an issue with my voice in 2012, and for a year, I couldn't figure out, almost a year, I just couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. Pardon my French, what the heck was going on? I was looking everywhere, couldn't find an answer, visiting all these doctors and specialists and everything, and no one had an answer, and no one thought anything was wrong. But I knew in the back of my head that something was a little bit off about my voice. So finally, in August of 2013, I ended up in a specialist office, a voice specialist office in Boston. And he was the one that told me, as soon as he heard me speak, he was like, "Oh, that? Yeah, we can fix that. That's no problem. We deal with that every day. Why don't you go see the front desk and schedule an appointment with one of Botox injection, and then schedule an appointment with one of our therapists in a few weeks after that." So I started getting Botox injections into my throat. There was basically tension. There was a bunch of tension there. And I got the Botox injections to relax my throat. And then as my voice was coming back, I worked with their higher level therapists to retrain my voice. And I think I'm more proud of that than, candidly, than my accident, maybe because I have recency bias. But that really drove home the importance of the STEP system and that support. So if I can talk about that, because you said to go through the letters one at a time. So the support, my mom was, again, my advocate. She was going with me, whether it was her or for whatever reason, if she couldn't make it, my dad would go with me. But I can remember early on in dealing with this, only a year, maybe a year and a half, 2 years in of getting Botox injections, I had to get them. I dealt with this whole thing for like 8 or 9 years. Now, obviously, you wouldn't know the difference because I have my perfect speaking voice back. And it's the second time I had to learn to talk. I remember, however, in that office of the therapist, one of my first appointments, and I was trying to pin her down to say, not physically, by the way. I was trying to pin her down to say, "Hey, your voice, don't worry, your voice is gonna be back to the way it was before you had this issue with your voice. So prior to 2012, you're gonna be back in no time and everything." And she couldn't say it. She wouldn't. I kept asking her, and I was frustrated. She wouldn't say it. My mom, who was with me, I talked to her after that. And she said, "You can't rely upon other people. Don't rely upon other people to give you that assurance that everything's going to be okay. That ideal and that vision of where you're going has to come from inside you.
Yeah.
You're working every day. You're the persistence of the STEP system. You're working every day. You're doing your exercises. You're showing up every day back at the specialist office every time you have an appointment. As long as you keep getting up and moving forward every day, there's no limit to your healing. So you're going to get there. You just have to know in your heart. You can't be looking for other people, whether it's a therapist, a voice therapist, or any doctor or nurses or anything like that. So that was so important to me. And that allowed me to trust that the next letter in the STEP system, that allowed me to trust that I was going to get there. The next step was going to be available to me as long as I just followed the system, kept getting up every day, doing my exercises, going to every appointment. I was going to get there. And then during that process, I made sure and I still do it to this day. I actually just saw my doctor. I see a Tai Chi and Qigong master.
Mm.
I see him once a month for Tui Na, and basically that translates into Chinese massage, but it's with his energy. And after he gets done, he does cupping. So I get that once every 5 weeks to help keep my energy strong. So I'm able to, number one, heal myself and take care of myself, which I think is the most important thing. And then number two, so I'm able to be there for other people, all the other people that we support, with common goal. So
Yeah, for sure.
that's going through each an actual real life example. I didn't even, usually I don't have the runway Keith, to share that second experience, but I'm really happy that we got to it today. I'm happy I shared that.
Yeah, I am too. And I think I think that's a great point about really having that trust coming from within and not having to rely on an outside source to be able to help provide that. Is huge, because not everybody is going to see, your vision. Not everybody's going to see the outcome that you're hoping to. And, no fault of their own, not everybody's going to be able to see that in your case, that you're able to make this recovery the way you are. I mean, it's a big leap, right? To go from where you were that day in the hospital in a coma to where you are today. So.
Yeah, and let me share something else that's coming to mind right now. So that organization, there's an organization called Dysphonia International, which that all dysphonia means is trouble, like problem with your voice. Like there's some problem with your voice. So with them, the same thing like it was when I got in my snowboarding accident, I had a traumatic brain injury. The doctors couldn't necessarily tell me that I was going to get there. And like I just shared that story, the voice therapist was unable to give me the assurance that I was going to get there. In that circle, it's all medically known. You can't find anything online that it's called, the thing I identify with. I don't want to put a label on it, like think I had a label, but it's the thing I identify with was a dysphonia, a spasmodic dysphonia. So within those circles and those support groups, there is no, like all the literature that's out there, there's no literature, there's no reference to the fact that once you have this, you can get better. It's just like, yeah, once you have this, you're kind of stuck with it for life.
Huh.
I didn't, and the reason that I'm more proud of it is because I didn't accept that. So I knew after my accident that I had my perfect speaking voice back, and I was going to get it back again. And I actually spoke at their symposium this year in April, at the end of April, and I was able to share my story, and very similar to what I'm going over with you today. And then we got to the voice issue thing, and the people were like, they're like, wait a minute, this kid had a voice disorder, and I really feel like, and I get this every time I speak for the most part, Keith. I have people coming up to me and like they're really encouraged. I give them hope that they too can get there. They're not stuck with this for life. Which is that's all the support and all the literature out there is, yeah, once you have this, sorry, you're kind of stuck. And I just, by sharing my story, I'm able to inspire others to give them hope that no, it's not the way it is. Like, just because a doctor says it doesn't mean it's a death sentence. You have to keep working every day and trust that once you take your first step, your next step is always going to be available for you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you mentioned that, and I always I'm a big Les Brown fan, and that's one of the things that he says. A doctor's prognosis is often what kills people versus giving them, hey, you got X% of a chance of living, or whatever it may be, how severe it is, and ultimately people can come out of it, and it doesn't have to be not every situation where you think it's going to be fatal is it fatal. And it's really what you do with that information and how you process it and overcome it. So.
Absolutely. So there was, after door knocking pre-foreclosure doors in high school, I got my real estate license, was a successful full-time realtor for 6 years. I got my license in March of 2008. I know, calm down. It was a great time to be a realtor.
Right.
But I got my real estate license March of '08, and then in 2014, at the end of 2014, my dad started buying these properties creatively. So non-conventional, which is not using bank financing, not signing personally or getting big, using any of his own money or big investor down payments. So, he would buy homes like on a rent-to-own agreement or close on it subject to someone's existing loan, or buy it with owner financing if the person didn't owe anything. And then as he was getting all these properties, he needed help marketing them. So he first came to me and I was like, no. I got my own thing going on over here. I'm all set. I don't want to mess with that. But luckily he's a good salesman, I guess you could say. He asked me more than once. So after him asking me 2 or 3 times, I finally said, well, okay, I can do it right alongside my business as a realtor. So over the years, when I first started with him, my income as a realtor was 80%. And with him, it was like 20%. And then over the next year, that's reversed. And in January of 2016, it didn't make sense for me to keep my real estate license anymore. So I let it go and joined him full time. The marketing all the properties translated to, okay, we need someone to handle all these buyer calls. And that's where I kind of came in. And then after trial and error, throughout the next several years, I was able to develop a buyer process, a very particular process that we like to bring our buyers to, our rent-to-own buyers, both initially before they get in the home and then when they're in the home, so that when they do come to the end of their agreement, and the majority of our buyers are able to get mortgage ready inside of 24 months, they are able to get their loan. So there's probably only 10 or 20% of the investors out there who, if they put a rent-to-own buyer in the home, that buyer goes forward to get their own loan. Only 10 or 20%, the rest of them fail. And they don't care because there are mentors literally from stage teaching, who cares? If they can't buy it, you work with another buyer and accept their down payment.
Yeah.
We kind of have an altruistic business model. So we like to set the buyers up for success, and we like them to get to the finish line. That way everyone's successful. So the buyers they're able to move their name is able to move to the title, and they're able to get their own loan on the property. We're happy. We're compensated well. And then the original seller is happy because the house is out of their name. So we're seeing a success rate of up to 90%. So probably 80 to 90% of our rental buyers that we stick in our properties do go forward and get their own loan. As I said, the industry average is like the inverse, the opposite of that. So we're pretty proud of that. And, I think we're definitely different, in that regard.
What do you think? That is a huge difference compared to the industry average. What do you think you're doing maybe differently that's helping those buyers, execute on the plan of being able to actually qualify for the loan and purchase it within 24 months?
Sure. So our process is very there's a lot of pre-qualifying that goes on in the beginning. So we want to make sure that the buyer, first and foremost, makes at least 3 times the monthly payment on the home. So what that equates to, roughly speaking, is they're going to have, when they do go forward to get their own loan, they're going to end up having a debt to income ratio, which is under 33%, which really, and you could probably attest to this, that's stricter than even lenders. You can get loans for up to 43% or even more if there are certain factors at play. So we like to do that first and foremost and make sure we're setting the buyers up for success before we even enter into the discussion about talking about down payment. I'm actually doing one with an associate right now in Maine. This morning after this call, we're going to try to reconnect with that buyer, but we haven't even mentioned down payment because we want to get clear on his income and make sure he makes enough and we're setting him up for success that he's able to support and run the home just like it was his own. Secondly, and just as important, is we want to make sure that the buyer has a down payment. We say anywhere from 3 to 10%. So it has to be at least that 3% initially. And then if it's closer to the 3%, we'd like to see a plan worked up over the course of their term that's going to get them closer to the 10% based on their personal and unique situation. We are usually able to get it up closer to 10% by the time they do get their own loan. So we find that by the time they get their own loan with a 10% down payment, the lender looks at them, geez, this person put either 10% initially or 10% over time down on this home. They've been living in it. They've been taking care of it and running it just like it was their own while working on their credit. That's another key component of our program is we require all of our rental home buyers to stay enrolled with a credit repair company, credit enhancement company, to make sure that they're going to qualify when they get to the end of their loan. So the lender looks at it and, like a no-brainer. Why wouldn't I approve this person for the loan?
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah, and I've had your dad on the podcast as we were talking about, kind of before the show, along with Zachary as well. And what you guys do is very creative. It's very interesting, and I think it's a great thing not only for the folks that you guys coach, but also a great thing for the end users, the buyers, and quite honestly the sellers, right, that are in a problem situation that they need to get out of. So
absolutely, yeah, that's why we like to think of it as an altruistic business model where the buyer wins, the seller wins, and we win. Yeah,
for sure. Let's maybe go back to Common Goal and tell us a little bit about what you're doing there. Are you taking on individual clients to help them through the process, or give me a little bit more as to what you're doing with Common Goal? I know you're doing the speaking and stuff as well, but
yeah. So what I'm doing with that is actually speaking at a lot of brain injury associations because I had a brain injury. So right. I'm applying to brain injury conferences to speak at their annual conference. And I really feel like that's the best way to kind of spread that message. And as I mentioned at the end of, or not at the end, but also I am speaking at, I spoke this year earlier at the end of April at Dysphonia International, their annual symposium that they have. And it's other organizations that do have individuals, because there's a lot out there, individuals that are going through a trauma or a life challenge or anything like that, helping them to get through to the other side. And really at this point, yes, it is one-on-one with people. I do have the bandwidth right now to be able to help. I'm not going to forever. I get that. But right now it is working one-on-one with people to help them get through. And actually, over the years, I've worked with people that have had death in the family. And help them always look at, okay, what's your next step? Because that can be extremely overwhelming. Another person I helped a few years ago was going through had a stroke and just was dealing with life after that and didn't know what her next steps were. And I met with her weekly over lunch to determine, okay, like let's just keep focused on the next step here. And all you should be focused on is what your next step is. And an important thing to mention, Keith, is that people who go through a trauma and the ones surrounding them don't realize that the person before that trauma and the person after that trauma are two different people. It's not the same person. So to view that person after the trauma like, oh, well, okay, so they can't do X, Y, and Z like they used to. Well, no kidding. It's a different person.
Yeah.
And I think when you view it that way, you're able to every day to get up and keep improving. If you're not, and if you're constantly comparing either yourself or a loved one to how you used to be, it's an impossible scenario. It's an impossible comparison because you can't do that. That's not fair to yourself or your loved ones to do that.
For sure. It actually, what you're saying kind of reminds me a little bit of Dan Sullivan's book, The Gap and the Gain, and really not focusing on that gap of, where you are compared to in this scenario compared to where you were before the trauma. Instead, you're focused on the daily gains that you're making along the way. So that's pretty neat.
Just keep getting up, and like I said, this can be applied to even starting a new business. Like just with starting a new business, when I launched this in January of 2022, for the first 90 to 120 days, I got up literally every day and did something. So I did, even if it was a little thing, I did something, even on a supposed like Sunday or an off day, just something. And by having that momentum and doing something every day, I was building an unstoppable momentum, which has carried me through to where I am today.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, it's an incredible story, for sure, Nick, and just appreciate you sharing it with the audience. I think as we were sort of talking about ahead of the show, that STEP system that you have is, while it was designed for helping people through trauma, I think it also can help people to get to their next step when it comes to, investing in real estate, when it comes to life goals that they may have, any challenges, really you can apply, it sounds like, this same STEP system.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what I'd like to do is give your listeners a way that they can get that for free. So if they go to my website, and I'll give you the exact what you need. It's just my name, nickprefontaine.com/step. You can download the STEP system for free. And what we've went over here, Keith, is just a 10,000 foot view. But STEP, the ebook, goes into detail on each one of those. And you and I touched on that a little bit. Is part of support is you got to make sure you have that advocate. Right. And then if anything whatsoever that I mentioned about my real estate journey and what we're doing today, how we buy homes creatively without using cash or big investor down payments or even our credit, if that's of interest to you, you can check out our website, which is smartrealestatecoach.com. And if you scroll down, you can get registered for the free master's class that's going to teach you all about how we buy and sell. And also at the end, if it's a good fit for you, because I understand it's what we do isn't a good fit for everyone. I'm biased, of course, but if it's a fit for you, you'll be able to take your next step at the end.
Yeah. No, that's great. I think that's good. And right now is, I know, just because I know your dad's story, and I went through something similar with 2008, but right now is almost ideal. I mean, your dad had to pivot to create these out of the box financing, out of the box ways of being able to still move property. And right now we're right in the middle of kind of a little bit of a tougher time where, the market's slowed down a little bit, the interest rates aren't quite where they used to be. And, I think there's an opportunity to apply some of these same techniques In it.
Absolutely. And one last thing. So I remember, just because I lived through that. So I lived through 2008. And then I got started at that time in March of 2008. I got my real estate license. So I knew, I like knew the warning signs, like what was happening. Probably 2.5 to 3 years ago, I started being like, all right, there are people advertising on the radio, buy a home with no money down, no credit check, no any of that. And I'm like, oh, it's coming.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
it's coming. When lenders start saying that, it's coming. And everyone thought I was nuts, but that's the environment we're in today.
yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, Nick, I've really enjoyed our time together today. I think you've added a ton of value to our listeners. And, I would ask and encourage everybody to go to Nick's website and download that step system. Again, I think it can be, paralleled not just to overcome trauma, but to overcome, challenges that you have in life and to be able to tackle goals that you have, whether that be real estate investing or whatever. And then, Nick, maybe I've got a couple of extra questions for you that I ask every guest. But before we get to that, outside of speaking and in working in real estate, what do you do when you've got some free time? How do you like to spend your time?
I am a big, I love reading. So I probably go through a book a week. I'm at that pace right now. And I actually I'm a runner too. So right now I'm going through a little bit of a resting period, but in March of 2022, I completed my first 10K. And then prior to that, I ran a half marathon twice and a 10-mile race once. But I think I'm done with the 10 mile and the 13.1 mile now. That's why I love this distance. I love the 10K. So um, I'm really happy about that. I just kind of felt like after I did the half marathon for the second time, my body had a hard time recovering, and I just think that's too much.
Yeah,
It's so long. 13.1 miles is long.
it
So,
is.
but a 10K that I felt literally after I ran it, I like took a deep breath. Maybe an hour went by, and like, all right, I could do that again.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, that's what I do. And then other than that, the reading and running, spending time with family, and really people ask me, I get asked similar questions all the time on interviews like this is what do you do for fun? That I'm doing what is fun to me right now, and that's common goal. My work with my speaking and helping others that are going through trauma, that I feel like I'm following my calling and my passion right now by doing that and doing what I feel I was put on this earth to do. So that's fun for me right now. I'm not into archery or a boomerang, or I used to golf. I haven't golfed in like 4 years. Maybe I'll get back into that, at some point. But right now that's where my time goes.
Yeah, I share that as well with, I love the work that I do with real estate and just, to me, it's not, it is kind of the hobby, it is kind of the extra
Yeah.
thing out there. It's not, I don't really look at it as work. So certainly can appreciate that. One question I ask every guest is, if you were to give some advice to somebody who's just starting out in their wealth building journey, what would that advice be?
Start. Start before you feel that you're ready. Just take one step, because once you take your first step, your next step is always going to be available to you. And I feel like there are too many people that get stuck in analysis paralysis and want to get 100% confident or knowledgeable about something before they take action. But just take action if you know like 30%, and then you can always get better after you take action. That
Yeah,
that's my number one thing.
yeah, I
Taking
think
action.
That's huge. That's huge. I think that I agree with you. I think that's one of the biggest things. So a lot of people, I go to different conferences and stuff and local meetups, and there's people that they come to the meetings regularly, but then as far as actually taking the first step to really getting something done, they don't necessarily always do that. So I think that's great advice, Nick. What about a book recommendation? Doesn't have to necessarily be real estate related. Maybe just something impactful that you've read recently.
Not recently, but I have to. I just would be remiss if I don't mention this book. So there is a book, one of my favorite books. I think I've read it cover to cover, like maybe 4 or 5 times. It is called Frequency by Penny Pierce. It's all about your personal vibration and energy and your personal field kind of thing. And the reason I bring that book up is I feel that it started me on this journey of where I am today, which is, getting my voice back for the second time. It's also what's helped me to start on this journey of my speaking and starting Common Goal and doing what I feel I was meant to do.
Okay, yeah, I have not had that one recommended, so I'll have to check that one out myself. I'm a runner as well, Nick, so I've got a long run I've got to do over the weekend, so maybe I'll listen to that as I go if it's on Audible. So, all right.
Oh, that's awesome.
Well, I appreciate again you being on the Wealth Flow, and I think we'll call it a show, Nick. Thanks.
Well, thank you for having me, Keith. Thanks for giving me this chance to share this with the listeners.
Absolutely.
Being that you're still here, I trust you found value in this episode. I personally wish I would have known these guests and strategies when I started my wealth creation journey. Go to wealthflow.capital to subscribe to our newsletter. And as a free gift, we will send you our quarterly market report and the top 10 things to look for in an investment opportunity. Take a minute to give our show a rating and review. Help us reach 1 million professionals by subscribing and sharing this episode with someone you know who could also find value in it.